Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com, and we are continuing in our series getting the most out of your stock plugins from your DAW. This video, we're going to focus on reverbs, which is part of the third category of plugins that can add dimension to your productions. Now, in our last video, we talked about delays and how they can be used to create stereo width. And in this video, we're going to focus on the reverbs. And if delays can create the stereo width, well, reverbs can help bring a sound further back in the mix or bring them more up front. It's really just creating an acoustic environment that sound's going to be living in. So it also creates dimension and space as well. So let's go ahead, click and drag the stock plugin reverb that comes with Ableton Live onto our vocal track. Now, like I said, reverbs are pretty straightforward. The sound is going to reverberate, but there's certain parameters that you can control or get a better grip on that can be transferable to any reverb plugin that you're going to be using to get the sound that you're looking for. So just remember that reverb is really creating a virtual room that the sound will be living in. And so the parameters are really just going to adjust the whole shape of that virtual room. So the first thing we're going to focus in is the size of that virtual room. How big is it? Is it a bathroom? Is it your neighbor's closet? Or is it a cathedral or a warehouse that you guys just broke into? So that can all be adjusted by the size. So we're going to focus on that. Now, a shorter and smaller value in your size will give you more of that bathroom or just more of a metallic type of sound. So let's go ahead and have the size all the way down, and I've got the dry and wet maybe halfway. I'll give it a little bit more dry wet so we can have more detail on the reverb. And so if we open up the size and create the room to be a little bit bigger, as you can see, it's creating more room for the reverberation of that virtual room to live in. So we go from small tin can room to a large room, and then over to a cathedral, large warehouse type vibe. So the size is really helpful in creating that virtual room atmosphere. But things to consider is coupling the size of the room with the decay time. And so the decay time of the reverb is the tail end. It's how long the reverb signal continues to be heard. And if you watched our last video about the delays, this is similar to the feedback of a delay. So with a shorter, and so let me put it to this, you can have a big size warehouse room, but if you have a short decay time, that means that the immediate or the tail of the reverb will stop really fast. So in reality, it doesn't really sound like a big room at all.
I know. Tell me where you're from, you seem so familiar.
So you can actually use the decay time and being really creative with that, you can carve out and get the right type of tone you're looking for. So the size of the room is the reflections, right? So you created this really big room and your sound is being reflected all over the place. But the decay time of how long it gets reflected is really, really short. So you don't really get to hear or feel the size of the room that well. So if you want to get a bigger sense of the room size, then increase the decay time.
I know. Tell me where you're from, you seem so familiar.
And obviously, more decay time will have more of the reverb tail live on. So those are the two parameters. And you can do the same thing. We can go now, give a smaller size of the room and a longer decay time. And what we're doing is we've got ongoing repeating of those reflections for a longer time. So shorter decay time, short room. Will give you that closed in bathroom, almost similar to what we had when we had delays set to time and not out of sync and brought the milliseconds down really, really short. So you can kind of get that similar effect here. And that's what we're doing. The decay time is about 620 milliseconds. And so if I adjusted the dry and wet knob here,
I know. Tell me where you're from, you seem so familiar.
it does add a little bit of excitement to the vocal, and it puts that it adds a little bit of that room that we've just created and some space with the vocal. So let's go ahead and give it maybe a medium-sized room, but then lower the just increase the decay time just a little bit.
I know. Tell me where you're from. You seem so familiar.
And now let me see in context with the beat and see how that feels.
I know. Tell me where you're from. You seem so familiar.
Now, the more decay time, it will probably send her farther back in the mix. So more reverb will send the sound farther back in the mix. The less will keep it much more up front in the mix. Let me demonstrate that for you. So it's a little bit metallic sounding, the reverb itself. It's a little more of that close room. So I just want maybe something, with the beat and the type of character that I'm hearing. I think a little bit bigger room and maybe a lot more of the decay time and a little less of the reverb could be helpful.
I know. Tell me where you're from. You seem so familiar. You don't have to go.
That's pretty cool. Now what we're going to do is go from the decay time over to the diffusion and reflection. Now, these parameters, the way I like to break them down is when you have less, when I crank it over to the left, the diffusion is reducing about negative 30 dB. All the way to the left, it's reducing negative 30 dB of reflections in the room. So think of it like this. You're in an empty room. And if you've ever been in an empty room before and you clap, you notice it sounds really metallic and pingy because the reflections are just bouncing all over the place. It's like when you move into a new house and you go in there and say, echo, or just clap, you can hear the reflections. But then as you start bringing your furniture in, you bring a couch, you bring a chia pet, a couple giraffes, whatever, you start to fill up the space with things. Well, now you're causing more diffusion, and so there's less reflections. So here, that means that, let's say I just brought a couch in the room, I just brought a couple people in there, there's some curtains, some soundproofing. Well, now that the reflections are going to be diminished. So I'm probably knocking off about 7.5 decibels of reflections.
I know.
See, now if I increased it,
I know. Tell me where you're from.
so you can see now the reflections are really loud and dominant. We've just increased them by 5.1 dBs. So if I wanted less reflections, I can just shove some couches in the room and that'll do the trick.
I know.
Now what's cool about that is that when we had it at 0, I felt like they were just the metallic reflections of the room. So I'll increase the size so we're not getting, we're getting less of the metallic vibe. And the decay tail is fine. The decay time is fine. But you can bring down the diffusion so that now there's less of the reflections.
I know. Tell me where you're from.
And that could be really helpful. So let's see what that sounds like.
I know. Tell me where you're from. You seem so familiar. You don't have to go.
So let's bypass and then place the reverb on and off.
I know. Tell me where you're from. You seem so familiar. You don't have to go. Oh no. Just want you to feel the.
Now the next parameter to focus in on would be the pre-delay. A pre-delay is going to determine how soon the reverb is heard. So a quick pre-delay means the reverb is going to happen immediately.
I know.
And a long pre-delay means that you'll hear the vocal and then the reverb slightly after.
I know.
So this could be cool if we meet a halfway point where you can hear the vocal and then the reverb slightly after that. It can give some nice clarity to the vocal so it doesn't feel like it's drenched in reverb.
I know. Tell me where you're from.
And after that, I want to focus on some input processing. In this specific reverb, you can actually dampen the high end as well as the low end. So we can take away any of the high end frequencies that are coming into the reverb as well as the lower frequencies as well.
I know.
And this is what creates a warm reverb sound. You might hear a lot of times a warm reverb or bright hall or dark warm hall. And basically what that means is that you're taking away any of the high-end frequencies that will give any shine or shimmer to the reverb. So that's what we've done here. We've taken away the high end and it's taken away the low end as well.
I know.
Similar to that would be the diffusion network in this reverb here allows you, remember we talked about the diffuse knob. If you want more of those reflections, then you would crank the diffuse knob. If you have more junk in your room, that means you're taking away a lot of the reflections. But the network here is tied to that knob, meaning what reflection specifically. So the higher end frequency reflections, is that what's being killed, or is it the low end here? So let's go ahead and take some of the high end away.
I know.
And if I cranked more of the reverb,
I know. Tell me where you're from.
you can hear how the reverb is a lot more muffled. And this might be good because then I could get the sense of the virtual room, but yet not a lot of that brightness is coming through and competing with the brightness of the dry vocal. If I did this, the reverse and just took away the low end,
I know.
then all we're getting is the higher end reflections of the room.
I know.
And then you can balance that out.
I know.
So now we'll go ahead and take away some of that the high end and see what that feels like.
I know. Tell me where you're from. You seem so familiar.
Now that's adding the depth that I like without any of the high end of the reflections that might get in the way of the vocal. So far we have been treating this virtual room, adjusting the shape, the size, how long the reverb, and everything that happens from the reflections of the room to the sound. And then you can go ahead and adjust the actual early reflections. That means the direct sound or the delayed sound of the direct signal by this knob here, reflect, which deals with the early reflection. So this is the sound before it gets altered by the room, and then you hear the reflections of the room of that sound. So you can balance that out as well. So let's just boost this all the way 6 dB and see what that does.
I know.
And then bring it down.
I know.
It felt like it was more dominant when we gave more early reflection.
I know. Tell me where you're from.
So you can hear a little bit more of the early reflections there, and then that kind of puts the reflections of the room a little bit further in the back. So just something to keep in mind. But these are the basic principles when adjusting any of the reverbs that you might be working with. As you can see, this has an extra feature here, freeze, that most reverb plugins might not have, and some might include, and some other reverbs might actually include a couple more things, but these are the basic foundations. And so about this freeze, this allows you to just freeze in place the current reverb settings that you have, and it just holds it and pauses that reverb continuously. So for instance,
I know. Tell me where you're from.
so the dry signal will continue, but that moment that you froze will stay there in its reverb. So that's really cool. I like using that a lot for effect purposes. And so in conjunction, having a little bit of the depth along with some of the delays that we added in the video prior to this can really give some all-around depth and width to the vocals. Let's listen to the reverb here and adjust that with the delays that we have from the last video. So you can see how the vocal was just dry and right in your face, and the reverb and delays really gave it the nice width and depth that we're looking for.